Chapter 10. How did you get out? Right, I forgot. The Icewing Prince. If only I could enchant his blood to thicken, he would be dead, and I would not have to listen to his chatter. Yet, Moon likes him. For that reason, I'll be patient. Me neither. The Icewings have legends about you. We know what you did to us, and I don't take orders from... Okay, I've lost my patience. I'm not ordering you to do anything, Prince Winter. But I think you know that those old legends don't tell the whole truth. You know that a dragon should not be judged by what other dragons say about him. And the more time you spend with me, the more you'll find out I'm really an absolutely wonderful dragon. That should do it. You're right. Let's start over. Problem solved. Now, how about the others? The nudging of a wing into his shoulder caused the familiar echoes in his head to suddenly vanish and drag Peacemaker back to reality. Glancing to his right, he saw that Cliff had walked up beside him, looking at him with a raised eyebrow, all the while moving his eyes towards the adults, all of whom were looking at the younger dragon with confusion, especially the Icewing, Prince Winter. Peacemaker? Clay asked, the oldest of the group of adults. Everything fine? Yeah, Peacemaker answered, rubbing his eyes for a moment, dazed from hearing what he thought sounded like the Icewing Prince's voice in his head. Turning his attention to the Icewing, he said, I'm sorry, Prince Winter. It's fine, Winter said, though he frowned for a moment. And it is just Winter. Contrary to my former instructors, I have not been a member of the Icewing royalty for 6 years. Oh, Peacemaker replied. Suddenly, he remembered the conversation he had with his winglet a few weeks ago, back when he learned Alligator was interested in scavengers and had been reading a book that the Icewing had helped write, specifically how he had been exiled from the tribe. Thinking of Alligator, Peacemaker remembered the letter he had written to Moon, asking about Winter. Well, even if you're not a prince, I know someone who reads your book, Peacemaker said. From beside Peacemaker, he heard Cliff chuckle. Yeah, he really loves that book, Cliff replied, nudging Peacemaker. Winter's eyes turned to Cliff, causing him to raise a brow. Well, if it isn't little Cliff, Winter said. There was a small undertone of amusement in his voice as he spoke. You certainly have grown since the last time we met. Ahem. That is Prince Cliff to you, Cliff huffed, though the Skywing did not appear to hold any hostility towards the Icewing's jab. This was evident when he smiled shortly after. It is good to see you again, Winter. Likewise, Prince Cliff, Winter answered, this time using Cliff's title respectfully. When he was sure the conversation between Winter and Cliff was ending, Peacemaker decided to quickly interject something he had been thinking, mostly in regards to the letter he had sent to Moon, in the hope she would contact Winter. Winter? Peacemaker asked, quickly. Winter? Peacemaker asked quickly, successfully catching the Sanctuary Preserve founder's attention. Satisfied, Peacemaker continued. A few weeks ago, I sent a letter to a friend of mine. She was in the original Jade Winglet, the one that you were in. Winter nodded at Peacemaker, though with a raised brow, clearly curious. From behind Winter, Peacemaker caught a glimpse of Sunny, Tsunami, and Clay glancing at each other while Starflight slowly frowned. Whatever it was the founders were thinking, it was clearly related to the first Jade Winglet. Undeterred, Peacemaker continued. Do you remember Moonwatcher? Peacemaker asked. Moon, Winter repeated. Peacemaker nodded at his question. The Icewing frowned slightly, but nodded his head. Yes, your friend, you say? Yeah. Peacemaker nodded. She was present during my hatching, my mom says. She's been my best friend ever since I can remember." The smallest hint of a smile crossed Winter's face when Peacemaker said this. For the shortest moment, the Icewing seemed to be lost in his thoughts, until something dragged him back to reality. Whatever that something was, Peacemaker noticed it only made the Icewing frown again. "So, you sent a letter to Moon?" Winter asked. "Yeah." "I'm sorry, Peacemaker, but what does that have to do with me?" When Winter said that, Peacemaker realized, to his disappointment, that Moon most likely had not gotten his letter, or Winter had not received a letter from Moon. But, regardless, what was important was that he was in front of Winter right here and now, so he had the opportunity to say what he wanted directly to Winter. "Well, Cliff and I have a clawmate in our winglet, a mudwing named Alligator," Peacemaker explained. "He loves studying about scavengers," Cliff added, chuckling softly. "He has so many theories. Sometimes I see him writing in the scrolls about scavengers." Peacemaker chuckled, nodding at Cliff's statement. "I sent a letter to Moon, hoping she would write to you about possibly meeting Alligator, maybe even you giving him a place as a caretaker in your preserve," Peacemaker asked, hopeful for Alligator's sake. When Peacemaker had finished, Winter leaned forward onto one elbow and stroked his chin. He looked intrigued by what Peacemaker had said, though whether or not he would agree was a different topic altogether. "No, I did not receive any letter from Moon. I haven't spoken to her in a few years, not since I left the academy," Winter explained. But before Peacemaker could feel his appointment, Winter continued, "I won't be able to speak with your clawmate today. I still need to unpack. But when classes start back up in a few days, I might be able to speak one-on-one with him." Hearing this, Peacemaker felt his wings raise with happiness. Knowing that Winter was at least willing to speak with Alligator made the Nightwing-Rainwing hybrid happy for his and Cliff's clawmate. "That would be great," Peacemaker said, happily. "We'll be sure to let him know when we see him." "Then I look forward to hearing his theories," Winter answered as he stood up, having finished his meal with the teachers and founders of the school. "As much as I would like to continue this conversation, we have to unpack." "We?" Peacemaker thought, tilting his head as he looked in the general direction of where Winter had turned his attention to. It did not take long for Winter to find out who the other person in the "we" Winter mentioned. Peacemaker spotted a small dragonette sleeping on the ground between Sunny and Winter, only now noticing the little dragonette now that the latter had stood up. The dragonette, who looked barely a month old, had the same light blue hue over his white scales as Winter did, and there was a pattern of dark blue scales on his snout and wings. Nudging the dragonette with one wing, Winter kneeled and gently nudged the dragonette's snout with his own. "Bobcat," Winter said softly, "up you come." The dragonette groaned, but his eyes opened and shut again, tiredly. "Turr," the dragonette, Bobcat muttered. "Papu, turr." Papu. Oh! The dragonette was trying to say Papa. Peacemaker felt like kicking himself when he realized, rather late, that the dragonette was Winter's. "I know," Winter replied to his son, gently rubbing the back of Bobcat's head, whose spikes had not yet grown, affectionately. "Don't worry, you can sleep some more when we get to our cave." Bobcat's eyes opened, ever slowly, and nodded with a heavy yawn. Standing onto his wobbly feet, Bobcat slowly climbed up on his father's wing. Shortly after climbing onto it, Winter tilted his wings upwards and slowly slid his son onto his shoulder blades. Bobcat, satisfied, snuggled up to his father's neck and rested his head there. Seeing this, Peacemaker could not resist the smile that crossed his face. In the back of his mind, he remembered the times his mother carried him when he was younger. He remembered her carrying him across the Nightwing village as she went about her daily routine, or whenever she did not have to leave him alone when she hunted out in the forest. Being so young, Peacemaker felt that he was absolutely safe when he was with his mother, and even if something bad happened, that she would be there when he fell. "We have a cave for you both in the southern wing," Tsunami said to Winter. The way she watched the interaction between Winter and his son had the head mistress of the school smiling, even if it was a very small one. "Don't worry, we made sure that it was meant for only you and your dragonette, Winter." Winter rolled his eyes at the headmistress's comment, which something told Peacemaker that Tsunami had just made a joke, but one he was not catching on to. Not wanting to be rude, the Nightwing Rainwing hybrid decided against inquiring. With the destination of his and Bobcat's living space known, Winter made his leave, walking away with his tired son. After Winter had left, Cliff and Peacemaker left the teachers and founders to themselves while getting their breakfast. "He seemed nice," Peacemaker commented after he and Cliff found a space to sit and eat. He's improved. Pearl said he used to be a pain in the tail back when he was a student here," Cliff said, all the while eating a piece of goat for his breakfast, while Peacemaker, as usual, had strawberries. "Really? What did she say he was like?" "Think Ermine, though with a lot more prejudice when they first met," Cliff explained. "Pearl said that Winter wasn't very friendly towards her, afraid of her, and also hated how she killed so many Icewings." "Right," Peacemaker commented, remembering hearing stories from Moon about how the second Skywing of the Jade Winglet had a bloody history, thanks to the manipulation of Queen Scarlet, Cliff's grandmother. "But I guess you could say he warmed up after the Battle of Jade Mountain," Cliff continued, taking another bite from his meal. Peacemaker chuckled at Cliff's pun, though he was glad no Icewings were in the area. Otherwise, that would make the joke inappropriate, or unoriginal, as Ermine would put it. Picking up a strawberry, Peacemaker placed it in his mouth and started to chew it, though he paused for a moment as a sour taste resonated in him. There was some sweetness, but not as sweet as most ripe strawberries he had eaten. Frowning, he continued to eat the strawberry and swallowed it. But it was sour. Strange that strawberry was bitter, but it and the others he had all looked ripe. Picking up another strawberry, he chewed on it, and met the same sour taste as before. The taste was not enough to make him spit out his favorite food, yet it certainly dampened his appetite. "That strawberry too seedy for you?" Cliff asked, chuckling at his own comment. "No, just sour," Peacemaker said. "I think the gatherers may have gotten a sour batch." Frowning, Cliff held out his talons, silently asking for a strawberry. Handing him one, Peacemaker watched his clawmate eat one. After a few seconds, Cliff swallowed one and took a moment, visibly contemplating, before shaking his head. "Nah, that tasted like any strawberry to me," Cliff said. "But if they are sour to you, the expert of strawberries, that's saying something, I suppose." Cliff held up a strawberry in his talons and looked at the red berry, checking the redness of the skin and the little seeds embedded in them. How strange. A berry he enjoyed since he was a dragonette, and he had never once considered the sourness. "Here." Cliff's voice dragged Peacemaker out of his thoughts. The Skywing Prince slid a piece of goat to him. "Eat up." At first uncertain about his friend's offering, not wanting to take away anything from Cliff's meal. But when Cliff looked at him with an encouraging gaze, Peacemaker took a piece of meat and proceeded to nibble on it. While the meal was just like any other he'd had, Peacemaker admitted that he enjoyed the meat more, knowing that Cliff had given it to him and that his friend was looking out for him. After finishing the meat, Peacemaker's thoughts went back to Winter, and wondered how to tell Alligator about him. "So, should we tell Alligator his hero is here?" Peacemaker asked Cliff, who slowly gave a mischievous grin at Peacemaker in response. What's that grin for?" "I say, we don't tell him," Cliff answered. "What? Why not?" "Why not surprise him? Classes start up again in a couple of days, so we can make sure he doesn't know," Cliff explained. "Imagine his excitement when we step into Sunny's class." Rubbing his chin, Peacemaker admitted that it did sound like a good idea. But how will we keep him from knowing? Peacemaker asked.
Simple,
Cliff began, until a rush of wind brushed past both him and Peacemaker as an unseen individual ran between them.
Already on it,
came Jaguar's voice from midair, startling both Cliff and Peacemaker, removing his camouflage as he snagged the last piece of Cliff's meal, tossing it into the air and swallowing it.
I'll tell Hyena.
With that, the rain wing of the quartz winglet was out of the prey center. Peacemaker looked at Cliff, who was looking at the small pile of goat bones, then looking in the direction Jaguar had gone. After a few seconds, Cliff's face grew red. Well, redder.
Jaguar, that was mine!
Cliff yelled in protest, before bounding towards the prey center entrance.
You owe me a...
Cliff! Tsunami yelled from across the prey center, interrupting Cliff's outburst, though causing some of the teachers to flinch at Tsunami's reprimand more so than Cliff. Cliff reluctantly quieted down, though he walked back to Peacemaker grumbling under his breath.
That rainwing is going to give me a heart attack,
Cliff muttered. Well, he always was good at hide and seek, Peacemaker said, smiling at his friend. Standing up, Peacemaker picked up the bones and the uneaten strawberries from their meal. Let's clean up. You got the rest of the day to yell at Jaguar. Cliff's mood brightened at this.
Yeah, an entire day off,
Cliff said happily.
Lots of stuff to do. So little time.
Indeed, there was a lot of stuff Cliff wanted to do in so little time. For most of the day, Peacemaker accompanied the Skywing Prince on these activities. One of the highlights of the day off included going to the music cave, in which Cliff performed a song, one in which he hoped would become beloved by his tribe for years to come. When it was midday, Peacemaker and Cliff returned to the Quartz Winglet's common cave, in order to take a break after an hour's flight across the Jade Mountain range. Instead of the cave being empty, as they originally expected, the two were greeted with a sight of both Tempest and Ermine talking together.
Are you sure that is everything?
Ermine asked. Her voice was calm, though there were hints that she had raised her voice during her conversation with Tempest. It is, Tempest answered. She stared at the floor, apologetically. Ermine looked away from Tempest, taking a deep sigh as she rubbed her brows with her talons.
I hope so, Tempest,
Ermine answered.
I deal with secrets every day at home. Sturt is the only one I trust in the Ice Kingdom.
She looked back at Tempest, whose gaze met Ermine's.
But you, my best friend, I always hoped you wouldn't keep secrets from me.
Tempest nodded. I know, Ermine, but this was a secret I just couldn't tell you. Not until things were right, Tempest explained.
And when would the right time have been?
Ermine asked. I don't know, Tempest admitted, but I wouldn't have kept this from you forever. Ermine huffed at this, looking away from Tempest after she said that. Peacemaker did not know why, but he felt responsible for potentially driving a wedge between the two friends. If he had not have had those nightmares, was not attacked by the entity, then Tempest would not need to reveal her secret too early to her friend. But, deep down, he knew it was not his fault. It was something outside of his control, something that Tempest had helped him through. Fine, Ermine finally said, nodding her head ever so slowly. So be it. Placing a wing over Tempest's shoulder, the Ice-Wing looked into her friend's eyes.
I just want to know if you trust me, Tempest.
Hearing this, Tempest nodded at her oldest friend.
Of course.
That's all I need to hear, Ermine said, her tone softening from the stern one she had previously.
But I think I need time to process this.
I understand, Tempest replied, nodding as she touched Ermine's wing with her own.
I'll explain more, I promise.
Hearing this, Ermine nodded, satisfied with what her friend had said. After the two had spoken, Ermine turned around and was shocked to see both Cliff and Peacemaker standing at the common cave entrance. But her expression immediately calmed as she picked up her bag and walked towards the entrance, paying no mind to the Skywing and Nightwing, until she walked past Peacemaker.
How are you feeling?
Ermine asked. Her tone was filled with genuine sympathy.
Great,
Peacemaker answered, smiling at her and appreciating the concern she had for him. Nodding at his answer, Ermine walked out of the common cave, most likely off to study, on her day off. Peacemaker guessed she preferred keeping busy, even when she was on breaks.
How about you? You okay, Tempest?
Cliff said, causing Peacemaker to turn his attention towards the Skywing as he approached Tempest, who had sat beside the fire pit. On closer inspection, Peacemaker saw that Tempest's eyelids were dark and half-lidded, almost like she was tired. This caused him to feel concerned for the Sea-Wing, especially after the revelations from that morning. Were there any side effects of her being as somnus? Exhausted, Tempest answered, rubbing her eyelids as a yawn escaped her.
Not much time to relax today?
Cliff said as he sat down across from her by the fire pit, followed by Peacemaker, who sat beside Tempest. I've had plenty of time, but I haven't slept yet, Tempest explained. I was waiting for Ermine to talk to me, and I was nervous about it, so not much time to sleep. Was she mad? Peacemaker asked. He hoped that most of the conversation wasn't that bad. While he and Cliff had seen the tail end of the conversation, that was not to say the rest had gone well. No, just disappointed, Tempest replied. We have some things to work out, but I think we'll be fine. Well, I hope things are settled soon. I hope I didn't ruin anything between you both. Tempest frowned at Peacemaker's words. Her eyes, despite looking tired, stared at him with a firm gaze. You did nothing wrong, Peacemaker. The Sea-Wing's voice was resolute as she said this. I was not going to let you die. Warmth filled Peacemaker's chest as he felt touched by Tempest's words. A brush from Cliff's wings against his own made this feeling grow, knowing he had two friends who were with him. Tempest had saved him from whatever was attacking him within his dream. Even before he knew about her abilities, she had helped him when the nightmares had become too much, giving him relief when she used her powers to put him in a dreamless sleep for the evening. Even outside of her protecting him within the dreams, she was always a comforting sight, and someone he liked to talk to when Cliff was not around. Both Tempest and Cliff were important to him. He only wished he was as amazing, like them. Looking towards Cliff, Peacemaker smiled up at the Skywing Prince, appreciating his gesture. Yet, as he looked up at the Skywing, Peacemaker blinked when he saw that where Cliff should have been stood a Sea-Wing with emerald green scales. The Sea-Wing looked at Peacemaker with a pair of kind, gray-green eyes. With another blink of his eyes, Peacemaker saw the familiar dark red of Cliff's scales. Thanks, Peacemaker said quickly as the image of the Sea-Wing filled his mind briefly. Returning his focus to his friends, he continued, Both of you. The day went by like a blur. After spending a few hours inside the common cave with Tempest and Cliff, the former of whom finally caught up on sleep while he and Cliff spoke with each other, the three dragons would travel together to the Prey Center for dinner. Almost everyone in the court swing that was present at the Prey Center, and everyone would have eaten together, at least until Winter arrived with Bobcat to get their meal. Shortly after the founder of the Sanctuary Preserve had entered the Prey Center, whose arrival was met with many stares from all of the Icewing students, some of which were filled with intrigue. Ermine was among these individuals, while some gave the former prince glares and most paid no mind as they went about eating their meal. Alligator walked in, carrying a bag of books he had collected. Hyena quickly stood up and placed a wing around the Mudwing's shoulders, casually, before he got the chance to see Winter.
"Let's eat in private together,"
Hyena said, guiding her friend in the opposite direction. The not couple leaving the cave just as quickly as Alligator had arrived. As dinner was finished, and the assigned students for cleanup duty, Peacemaker and Tempest being the ones assigned for tonight, started cleaning the center up, with Clay's help and supervision, of any leftover scraps the other students missed. Peacemaker looked in the direction of Winter and Bobcat, both of whom sat in the far corner of the cave. As Winter silently read a book, his eyes darting from line to line in silence as he read. Meanwhile, Bobcat sat in the space between his father's chest and the book he held, the Icewing Dragonette eagerly trying to see what his father was reading. Whether Bobcat understood the words or not, Peacemaker could not tell. But the Dragonette's focus was glued to the book. Winter, seeing his son's fascination in the book he held, silently read the passage to his son, causing Bobcat to give the biggest grin as he looked up at his father while he read. "I could freeze you one part at a time. First your horns, then snap them off. Then your tail, freeze it and snap it off. Then your claws and your wings. Should I go on?" Peacemaker felt his talons dig themselves into the cave floor as he heard a voice speak, which sounded like a younger version of Winter's. Biting his tongue, Peacemaker turned away as he felt something hot fill his chest. Anger. The purpose of this anger? He had no idea. But hearing those words in his mind, they triggered him for some reason, even though he had only just met Winter and had never heard him say those words. "Whoa, Peacemaker! Stop!" someone said in protest, just as Peacemaker felt his feet step into a pile of leftover bones. Turning around, Peacemaker saw that Shade Hunter had been sweeping the bones into a pile. "Don't mind watching where you're stepping, please." Blushing, Peacemaker stepped off the pile while wiping off the dust from his feet. "Sorry, Shade Hunter," Peacemaker said. "Just distracted." "I could see that," she responded. But seeing her smile, Peacemaker knew she wasn't angry. "Just be a little more careful, okay?" "Yeah, I will," Peacemaker said, swiping the scattered bones back to the pile. Once he had swept all of the bones back into her pile, Shade Hunter nodded appreciatively. "Much appreciated, Peacemaker," the Nightwing from the Copper Winglet said brightly. "Why were you distracted?" Peacemaker shrugged his wings. He knew why he was distracted, but he did not know how to explain how he was distracted. It was not like he could say, "I heard Winter say something really nasty," but he did not actually say it. If he said that out loud, then it wouldn't be right, especially since the Icewing had just arrived at the school in the morning. "Just thinking about Moon and Kibley," Peacemaker lied, though he had been thinking of them since Winter's arrival. They and Kinkachu never talked much about Winter. He was in their winglet when the school opened. Shade Hunter nodded, glancing at Winter and his Dragonette, the latter of whom lifted his head tiredly to look up at his father, only to go back to sleep. "Maybe they planned for you to meet him. Perhaps take you to Sanctuary after you graduated." Shade Hunter pondered aloud. "Maybe," Peacemaker said, admitting that may have been their reason. Winter was in charge of the preserve at Sanctuary. He could only imagine the work it would take to maintain a preserve of scavengers, especially if they were as fast as a scavenger that his winglet had chased. "Well, we better get back to cleaning," Shade Hunter said, going back to cleaning. "Okay. Thanks, Shade Hunter," Peacemaker replied, going back to cleaning himself. As he picked up a bone, something in the back of Peacemaker's mind prodded him. "Ask to spend time with her." Peacemaker's eyes blinked, looking around to see if anyone had actually spoken to him. Yet, everyone was minding their business as they cleaned. Deciding to go back to cleaning, Peacemaker intended to do so, until he heard the voice again.
Ask to spend time with her.
This time, he knew he heard the voice, and it sounded familiar. A voice he had heard all of his life. It sounded like Kinkajuice. The strange thing was, while he did not want to speak to Shadehunter, knowing she was busy, something about Kinkajuice's voice made it sound like Peacemaker should listen to her, almost like he was meant to do it.
Ask to spend time with her,
Kinkaju's voice repeated, this time a little bit more forcefully. She's busy, Peacemaker replied, frowning while he went back to cleaning. You will be happy. This time, the voice sounded like his mother's. It was unmistakable. Suddenly, Peacemaker's thoughts were dragged back to a dream he had had several weeks back. The one where he was in the body of a dragonette and was playing with the black and white dragonette. In the dream, Peacemaker remembered being dragged away from the crying dragonette by his mother, and she had said those exact words. And like before, he felt so angry. No! Peacemaker's mind shouted to the voices of Kinkajou and his mother, forcing those voices to go silent. And he felt sick. His stomach felt queasy, and his head felt light. Denying the voices felt so painful. Yet, it felt right to him. Honestly, if he wanted to spend time with Shadehunter, he would ask her when they were both free and not working. But he would not go out of his way while she was busy, like him. After all, hearing his mother's voice repeat the same words from the dream he'd had, Peacemaker felt satisfied. Turning his attention back to his work, Peacemaker finished the remaining parts of his cleaning duty. Yet, as he did so, all Peacemaker's mind could do was wander back to the dream he'd had all of those weeks ago of the black and white Nightwing.